I have been a physician for over 25 years, and there is something I need to tell you that I genuinely wish I had said out loud much sooner. I am not talking about a new drug. I am not talking about a surgical procedure or some exotic supplement that costs $300 a month and arrives in a fancy box. What I am about to share with you is something so simple, so available, and so backed by real science that when I first stumbled across the research, I actually laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, but because I could not believe that something this accessible had been sitting right in front of all of us for decades. I have had patients spend years cycling through medications, adjusting doses, tolerating side effects, and wondering why their blood pressure numbers refuse to cooperate. And some of them, the ones who found what I am going to show you today, came back to me after one single week with numbers that made me look twice at their chart. I am talking about a morning habit. Something you can start tomorrow, before your coffee even finishes brewing. Something that costs almost nothing, takes very little time, and works through a biological mechanism that research now understands better than ever before. By the time we are finished here, you are going to have a complete picture of exactly what this is, why it works, how to do it correctly, and what realistic results actually look like in 7 days. There is a reason this particular approach has started generating serious attention in research circles, and the story of how it was first documented is worth knowing because it will change the way you think about mornings forever. It begins not in a laboratory, but in a small coastal village in Japan in the early 1980s, where a group of researchers noticed something statistically unusual. The elderly residents of this community had some of the lowest rates of hypertension ever recorded in an industrialized nation. They were not on special diets in any dramatic sense. They were not running marathons. But they shared one ritual, performed without exception every single morning, that the research team initially dismissed as cultural habit rather than health intervention. It took over a decade of follow-up studies before anyone took the correlation seriously enough to look at the biological mechanism beneath it. When they finally did, what they found restructured the way many scientists now think about how the body regulates vascular tension in the hours immediately after waking. Those early morning hours, it turns out, are not neutral time. They are a window, a specific physiological window, during which the cardiovascular system is more responsive to external input than at almost any other point in the day. What happens inside that window either sets your blood pressure on a healthy trajectory for the next 16 hours, or it quietly locks it into a pattern of elevated strain that no afternoon walk can fully undo. Keep that window in mind, because everything I'm about to explain flows directly from it. To understand why this morning habit works the way it does, I want you to imagine your arterial system as a network of garden hoses laid out across a very large yard. Now imagine that overnight, while you were sleeping, the pressure valve controlling all those hoses was turned up slightly. Not all the way, just enough that by morning, every hose in the network is carrying water at a tension that is slightly too high. This is not a metaphor, this is physiology. Something called the cortisol awakening response causes a natural spike in blood pressure in the first 30 to 60 minutes after you open your eyes. For most people over 50, that spike is sharper than it was at 30, and it takes longer to come back down. The endothelium, the thin, incredibly sensitive inner lining of your blood vessels, is doing its best to regulate that pressure by releasing a compound called nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is essentially your body's built-in pressure relief valve. It signals the smooth muscle walls of your blood vessels to relax and widen, which lowers resistance and drops pressure naturally. Here is the problem. According to research published through institutions studying cardiovascular aging, nitric oxide production declines measurably as we age, and it declines even faster in people who are sedentary in the morning, chronically dehydrated, or exposed to bright artificial light and stress immediately upon waking. The morning habit I am going to show you works precisely because it directly restores the conditions your endothelium needs to produce nitric oxide at levels that meaningfully move your blood pressure numbers. And the science for how dramatically it can do so in just 7 days is something I was not fully prepared for when I first reviewed it. Now, I want to be honest with you about something, because I think you deserve honesty more than you deserve a polished sales pitch. Most people who hear the phrase morning habit for blood pressure immediately picture something they have already tried and abandoned. Deep breathing exercises that felt forced, cold water on the face that lasted 1 week, herbal teas that tasted like garden mulch and did nothing measurable. I hear you. I was skeptical of those things too. Here is where most people go wrong though, and this is the part that actually matters. The common mistake is treating the morning as a single moment rather than a sequence. Your cardiovascular system does not respond to one isolated action. It responds to a chain of inputs that either amplify or cancel each other out. People who try one piece of this puzzle and give up are like someone who installs one new pipe in a house with corroded plumbing and then wonders why the water pressure is still low. What the research consistently shows is that the morning habit has to involve the right sequence of 3 interconnected steps, all performed within a specific time frame after waking, to trigger the nitric oxide cascade in a way that produces the kind of results I mentioned at the start. Most people have tried one of these steps in isolation. Almost nobody is doing all 3 in the right order. That distinction, right steps in the right order, is the entire difference between something that works and something that feels like another failed experiment. And that sequence is exactly what I am going to walk you through right now. The morning habit begins the moment your feet touch the floor, and the first step involves something most people do the exact opposite of. Within 5 minutes of waking, before any screen, before any news, before any conversation that carries stress, you need to step outside or stand near a window that lets in natural light and take 10 slow nasal breaths. Not mouth breaths, nasal breaths specifically because the nasal passages are lined with tissue that produces nitric oxide directly during nasal inhalation. And that nitric oxide is carried into the bloodstream with every breath. Health researchers studying breath and vascular function have found that consistent nasal breathing in the morning can measurably influence endothelial function within days. The second step happens immediately after, and this is where the hydration component comes in. You need to drink between 12 and 16 ounces of plain, room temperature water before anything else enters your body. Not coffee, not juice, water. Overnight, your blood becomes slightly more viscous, thicker, because you have not taken in fluids for 7 or 8 hours. Thicker blood means your heart has to work harder to push it through your vessels, which means higher pressure. Rehydrating immediately after waking is one of the most underestimated blood pressure interventions that exists, and it costs nothing. The third step is where most people are completely lost, and it involves a form of low-intensity movement. Not exercise in the traditional sense, but something gentler and more targeted that I will explain in detail now because the how matters just as much as the what. When researchers compared 2 groups of adults over the age of 55, one group that performed this specific style of morning movement and one group that did not, the group that moved showed statistically meaningful reductions in both systolic and diastolic readings within 7 to 10 days. The movement I'm describing is sometimes called gentle flow, a term borrowed from physical therapy, and it involves moving every major joint in your body through its natural range of motion within the first 15 minutes of being upright. Think of it this way. Your lymphatic system, unlike your circulatory system, has no pump. Your heart pumps blood, but lymph, the fluid that helps clear inflammatory compounds from your tissues, moves only through muscle contraction and body movement. When you sleep, lymphatic flow slows almost to a halt. The inflammatory compounds that accumulate overnight, including some that directly stiffen blood vessel walls, sit in your tissues until you move. Gentle morning movement, shoulder rolls, slow hip circles, a few minutes of easy walking around your home, gentle neck rotations, physically flushes those compounds back into circulation where your body can process and eliminate them. When researchers at institutions focused on cardiovascular rehabilitation began integrating this sequence into morning protocols, they noted that patients who followed all 3 steps together, nasal breathing, immediate hydration, gentle joint movement, showed greater reductions in morning blood pressure readings than those who made dietary changes alone. The entire sequence takes between 12 and 20 minutes. It requires no equipment. It can be done in a living room, on a back porch, or even in a hotel room while traveling. Here is my challenge to you. Try this sequence for 7 days straight, starting tomorrow morning, and then come back and tell me what you noticed in the comments. I mean that genuinely. Now, before you begin, there are a few things worth knowing that will make the difference between results and frustration. First, timing is critical. The entire sequence needs to happen within 20 minutes of waking for the physiological window to be fully open. If you wait until after breakfast, after coffee, after checking your phone, the cortisol spike has already passed its peak and the opportunity for maximum endothelial response is reduced. Second, the nasal breathing step works better outdoors or near a window because natural morning light simultaneously triggers a suppression of melatonin and a release of serotonin, both of which have documented secondary effects on vascular tone. Third, avoid cold water during the hydration step. Room temperature water is absorbed more quickly and does not cause the brief vascular constriction that cold water can trigger in some people. Fourth, if you are currently taking blood pressure medication, do not stop or adjust it without speaking to your physician first. This habit works alongside medication beautifully, and for some people, consistent practice over several weeks may eventually prompt a conversation with their doctor about adjusting their prescription. But that conversation belongs with your doctor, not with a morning routine. The goal is not replacement. The goal is optimization. And what you will likely notice first is not a dramatic single-day drop, but a gradual smoothing. Your morning readings becoming more consistent, the spikes becoming less sharp, the overall trajectory beginning to trend downward day by day. I want to end by telling you something that goes beyond blood pressure numbers. When I think about the patients who have sat across from me over the years, the ones who came in worried, charts in hand, frustrated that their bodies felt like they were fighting against them, what strikes me most is not the clinical data. It is the look on someone's face when they realize that they have more agency over their own health than they were ever told. That look, that shift, that is why I became a physician. Dr. Albert Winslow has spent years in this work, and one truth I keep returning to is this: the most powerful health interventions are almost never the most complicated ones. They are the ones that align with what your body was already trying to do, the ones that work with your biology instead of overriding it with force. This morning habit is one of those interventions. It does not fight your cardiovascular system. It gives your cardiovascular system what it needs to do its job. It restores the conditions under which your body can regulate its own pressure, the way it was designed to. 7 days. That is all I am asking. Not 7 weeks, not 7 months. 7 mornings. 12 to 20 minutes each. Nasal breathing in natural light. A full glass of room temperature water. Gentle movement through every major joint. Done in sequence, done consistently. Done with the understanding that your body is capable of remarkable self-correction when you stop working against it and start working with it. I have given you the science. I have walked you through every step. The window opens again tomorrow morning the moment you wake up. Be ready for it. And when your numbers start to change, and I genuinely believe they will, I want to hear about it. Start tonight by making tomorrow morning different from every other morning you have had. Because some habits, once started, have a way of changing everything that follows.